The door creaked open and I froze half-dressed, my heart slamming against my ribcage. A stranger stood in the doorway of my tiny New York apartment, her silhouette framed by the flickering hallway light. In that split second, I didn't know whether to scream or dive for cover, but her eyes, wide and apologetic, locked onto mine and the world stopped. My name is Evelyn Harper, and I'm not the kind of person who believes in fate. At 28, I've built my life on logic, working long hours as a graphic designer, paying rent for this shoebox apartment in Brooklyn, and keeping my heart tightly guarded after too many disappointments. But that night, everything I thought I knew about myself unraveled. It was a Thursday, the kind of sticky summer evening where the city hums with restless energy. I'd just gotten home from a grueling day at the studio, my hands still smudged with charcoal from sketching. Exhausted, I kicked off my shoes and started changing, tossing my blouse onto the bed. That's when the door opened. No knock, no warning. I spun around, clutching my tank top to my chest, and there she was. "I'm so sorry," the woman stammered, her voice low and warm like honey over gravel. She was about my age, maybe a little older, with short, tousled black hair and a leather jacket that looked like it had seen 1,000 adventures. Her brown eyes darted away, but not before I caught the flush creeping up her cheeks. "Too thought this was my friend's place. Wrong apartment." I should have been furious. I should have demanded she leave. But something about her, maybe the way she fumbled her words or the genuine panic in her expression, made me pause. "You always barge into strangers' apartments?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She winced, running a hand through her hair. "Only when I'm running late and my brain's on autopilot. I'm Lila Monroe. I swear I'm not a creep." I raised an eyebrow, still holding the tank top like a shield. "Evelyn, and you've got about 10 seconds to convince me you're not a serial killer." Lila laughed, a nervous, infectious sound that made the tension in the room crackle. "Fair. I'm a bartender at the Rusty Anchor, I'm allergic to cats, and I'm terrible at lying, so if I was a serial killer, you'd probably see it written all over my face." Despite myself, I smirked. There was something disarming about her, something that made my pulse race for reasons I couldn't quite name. I lowered the tank top, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt, not just physically, but in a way that made my skin prickle. "You're lucky I'm too tired to call the cops," I said, pulling on a flannel shirt. "But you owe me an explanation. How do you mess up an apartment number this badly?" Lila stepped inside, hesitant, like she was testing the waters, and closed the door behind her. "My friend Jess lives in 4B. I'm in 4C right next door. I was supposed to meet her for drinks, but I got distracted and..." She trailed off, gesturing vaguely. Here I am, making a fool of myself. I crossed my arms, studying her. She didn't look like someone who belonged in this rundown building. There was a spark in her, a kind of restless energy that felt out of place against the peeling wallpaper and creaky floors. "Well, Jess isn't here," I said, "and I'm not in the mood for company." "Understood." Lila nodded, backing toward the door. "I'll get out of your hair. But maybe I'll see you around? Since we're neighbors and all." I didn't answer, but as she slipped out, I caught myself staring at the empty doorway, my heart still pounding. I told myself it was just adrenaline. I told myself I didn't care. But as I locked the door and sank onto my bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just shifted, like a crack in the foundation of my carefully ordered life. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. Scrawled in messy handwriting, it read, "Evelyn, I owe you a coffee for the scare. Meet me at the Rusty Anchor tonight? No pressure. Lila." My first instinct was to crumple it and toss it in the trash. I didn't need complications, especially not from a stranger who'd seen me half naked. But by noon I was still holding the note, rereading it like it held some secret code. I didn't go to the Rusty Anchor that night. I told myself it was because I was busy, but the truth was I was scared. Scared of the way Lila's smile had lingered in my mind, scared of the warmth in her voice, scared of the part of me that wanted to say yes. I'd spent years building walls around my heart ever since my first love, Sarah, left me without a word after 3 years together. I wasn't ready to let anyone in, especially not someone who'd stumbled into my life by mistake. But New York has a way of forcing you to face things you'd rather avoid. A week later, I ran into Lila in the hallway, her arms full of grocery bags. She grinned like we were old friends. "You didn't show," she said, no judgment in her tone, just a playful lilt. I waited with 2 coffees like an idiot. I shrugged, avoiding her eyes. Got busy. She set the bags down, leaning against the wall. You're a tough one to figure out, Evelyn Harper. But I'm persistent. I wanted to snap at her, to tell her to leave me alone. But instead I found myself saying, maybe next time. The words slipped out before I could stop them, and Lila's grin widened, like she'd just won a bet. Next time it is, she said, picking up her bags and disappearing into her apartment. I stood there, my keys dangling in my hand, wondering what the hell I'd just gotten myself into. Over the next few weeks, Lila became a constant presence, slipping notes under my door, waving in the hallway, even leaving a slice of pizza outside my apartment with a post-it that said, "Peace offering." I tried to keep my distance, but she was relentless, her charm chipping away at my defenses. One night, I found myself at the Rusty Anchor, not because I planned to, but because my feet carried me there after another soul-crushing day at work. Lila was behind the bar, pouring drinks with an easy grace that made the crowded room fade away. When she saw me, her face lit up. "Well, look who decided to grace me with her presence," she teased, sliding a glass of water my way. "No coffee tonight, but I can make a mean mocktail." I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't hide my smile. "Just water's fine." We talked for hours that night, the bar's noise fading into the background. Lila told me about growing up in a small town in Ohio, where being openly queer meant risking everything. She'd moved to New York to escape, to find a place where she could be herself. I told her about my own past, bits and pieces, carefully curated to avoid the raw parts. But with every word, I felt myself opening up, like a flower unfurling after a long winter. By the time the bar closed, I was tipsy on more than just mocktails. Lila walked me home, our shoulders brushing as we navigated the quiet streets. At my door she hesitated, her eyes searching mine. "You're not what I expected, Evelyn," she said softly. "But I'm glad I walked into the wrong apartment." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, my throat tight. As she turned to leave, I reached out, my fingers grazing her wrist. "Lila," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Maybe I'll see you tomorrow." Her smile was like sunlight breaking through clouds. Tomorrow it is. Tomorrow came, and with it, a nervous energy I hadn't felt in years. I stood in front of my mirror, tugging at my shirt, second-guessing every choice I'd made since meeting Lila. Why had I agreed to see her again? Why was I letting her get under my skin? But when I opened my door and saw her leaning against the hallway wall, her leather jacket slung over one shoulder and a lopsided grin on her face, all my doubts melted away. "Hey, stranger," Lila said, her voice warm and teasing. "Ready for an adventure?" I raised an eyebrow, trying to play it cool despite the flutter in my chest. "Depends. Where are we going?" "Somewhere that's not this hallway," she said, jerking her thumb toward the stairwell. "Come on, Evelyn. Live a little." Against my better judgment, I followed her. We ended up at a tiny park tucked between towering buildings, the kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. The air was crisp, the first hint of autumn creeping into the city. Lila spread a blanket on the grass and pulled out a thermos of hot cider, 2 cups, and a bag of pastries from a bakery I'd never heard of. "Figured you're not a picnic in the park kind of girl," she said, handing me a cup. "But I'm gonna change that." I laughed, the sound surprising me. "You're awfully confident for someone who doesn't know me." "I know enough," she said, her eyes glinting with mischief. "You're stubborn, you're talented, and you've got walls higher than the Empire State Building. But I'm a climber." Her words hit harder than I expected, and I looked away, sipping the cider to hide the heat in my cheeks. We spent the afternoon talking about art, music, the way the city felt alive and unforgiving all at once. Lila had a way of making the ordinary feel extraordinary, like every moment was a story waiting to be told. I found myself telling her things I hadn't told anyone, not about Sarah, not yet, but about the little dreams I'd buried under years of routine. How I used to paint, not just design, and how I'd once dreamed of having my work in a gallery. "You should do it," Lila said, leaning back on her elbows, the sunlight catching the edges of her hair. "You're too good to hide behind a computer screen." I shook my head, brushing off the idea. "It's not that simple. Life gets in the way." "Life's always in the way," she said. "But you make room for what matters." Her words lingered, heavy with possibility. As the sun dipped below the skyline, we packed up and walked back to our building, our steps slow like neither of us wanted the day to end. At my door, Lila hesitated, her hands stuffed in her pockets. "You're not gonna disappear on me again, are you?" she asked, her voice softer now, almost vulnerable. I met her gaze, my heart racing. "Not this time," I said, and for the first time in years I meant it. The next few weeks were a blur of stolen moments, coffee runs, late-night talks at the Rusty Anchor, walks through the city that felt like they could go on forever. Lila was a force of nature, pulling me out of my shell with every laugh, every touch, every glance that lingered a little too long. But with every step closer to her, the ghosts of my past grew louder. Sarah's betrayal had left scars I couldn't ignore, and the fear of being hurt again kept me from fully letting go. One night, after a long shift at the bar, Lila showed up at my door with a bottle of wine and a tired smile. "Rough day," she said, collapsing onto my couch. "Mind if I crash here for a bit?" I nodded, pouring us each a glass. We sat in comfortable silence, the city's hum filtering through the open window. But as the night wore on, the air between us grew heavy, charged with something unspoken. Lila set her glass down and turned to me, her eyes searching. "Evelyn, what's holding you back?" she asked quietly. "I see it in you, this wall you keep up. What happened?" I froze, the question cutting too close to the bone. I wanted to tell her about Sarah, about the years I'd spent rebuilding myself after she left. But the words stuck in my throat, and all I could manage was, "It's complicated." Lila didn't push, but she didn't look away either. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice steady. "Whenever you're ready, I'm here." Her words broke something in me, a dam I'd built to keep the pain at bay. I leaned forward, my hand brushing hers, and for a moment I thought I might kiss her. But fear won out and I pulled back, my heart pounding. "I need time," I whispered. She nodded, her expression soft but resolute. "Take all the time you need. I'm not running." That night after she left, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk sketching for the first time in years, letting the lines of Lila's face spill onto the page, her sharp jaw, her warm eyes, the way her smile seemed to hold 1,000 secrets. I didn't know what I was feeling, but I knew it was big, bigger than anything I'd let myself feel since Sarah. The next morning I found another note under my door. "You're worth waiting for. Lila." I held it to my chest, my resolve crumbling. I was falling for her and it terrified me. Falling for Lila felt like stepping onto a tightrope, exhilarating, terrifying, and utterly impossible to turn back. Every moment with her was a push and pull between wanting to dive in and wanting to run. But she was patient, her presence steady like a lighthouse in the storm of my doubts. One rainy afternoon, Lila dragged me to an art gallery in Manhattan, a small tucked-away place filled with vibrant abstracts and soft jazz. I hadn't been to a gallery since my college days, and the familiar ache of longing stirred in my chest as I wandered the exhibits. Lila watched me, her eyes catching every flicker of emotion. "You belong here, Evelyn," she said, standing beside a painting of a stormy sea. "Your work could be on these walls." I laughed, brushing off the compliment, but her words stayed with me. That night, back at my apartment, I pulled out my old sketchbook, the pages yellowed and untouched for years. I started drawing again, tentative at first, then with a ferocity I hadn't felt in ages. Lila's belief in me was like a spark, reigniting a part of myself I'd thought was gone. But with every step forward, my past loomed larger. I hadn't told Lila about Sarah, and the weight of that secret was starting to suffocate me. One evening, as we sat on my fire escape, sharing a pizza and watching the city lights, I knew I couldn't keep it in any longer. "Lila," I said, my voice trembling, "there's something I need to tell you." She turned to me, her expression open and unguarded. "I'm listening." I took a deep breath, the words spilling out like a flood. I told her about Sarah, how we'd met in college, how I'd thought she was my forever, how she'd left without a word after 3 years, shattering my trust and love. I told her about the walls I'd built, the fear that kept me from letting anyone in. By the time I finished, tears were streaming down my face, and I felt raw, exposed. Lila didn't say anything at first. She just reached for my hand, her touch warm and steady. "I'm not her, Evelyn," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "And I'm not going anywhere." I wanted to believe her, but doubt gnawed at me. "What if you change your mind?" I whispered. What if this thing between us falls apart? Then we'll pick up the pieces, she said. Together. Her words were a lifeline and I clung to them. That night, as the rain pattered against the fire escape, I let myself lean into her, my head resting on her shoulder. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, but it was a promise that maybe, just maybe, I could trust again. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Lila and I grew closer, our lives intertwining in ways I hadn't thought possible. She'd show up at my apartment with takeout, or I'd find myself at the Rusty Anchor, sketching while she worked. But the closer we got, the more I noticed the cracks in Lila's own armor. She'd dodge questions about her family, her past, her life before New York. I didn't push, but I could sense there was something she wasn't telling me. One night everything came to a head. We were at a queer poetry slam in the East Village, the room buzzing with energy. Lila was radiant, laughing and cheering for the performers, but I could see a shadow in her eyes. After the event, as we walked home, I finally asked, Lila, what's going on? There's something you're not telling me. She stopped, her hands shoved in her pockets, the streetlights casting long shadows across her face. It's not easy to talk about, she said, her voice low. But you deserve to know. We sat on a bench in a quiet square, the city oddly still around us. Lila told me about her past growing up in a conservative town, where her family had rejected her when she came out at 17. She'd been on her own ever since, scraping by, building a life from nothing. I don't let people in easily, she admitted. Because when I do, it hurts too much when they leave. Her words echoed my own fears, and for the first time, I saw how much we had in common, two people carrying wounds, trying to find a way to heal. I reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. I'm not going anywhere either, I said, echoing her promise. That night, back at my apartment, something shifted. As we stood in my cramped kitchen, washing dishes side by side, Lila turned to me, her eyes bright with something unspoken. Before I could overthink it, I closed the distance between us, my lips finding hers. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, then deepening with a hunger that took my breath away. It was like coming home after years of wandering. When we finally pulled apart, Lila rested her forehead against mine, her breath warm against my skin. I've wanted to do that since the day I walked into your room, she whispered. I laughed, my heart soaring. You're lucky I didn't throw a shoe at you. But even as we laughed, a new fear crept in. This was real now, and real things could break. Our first kiss was a spark, but what followed was a wildfire. Lila and I fell into each other with a kind of reckless abandon, our days filled with stolen glances and late-night confessions. My apartment, once a fortress of solitude, became a shared space, her jacket draped over my chair, her laugh echoing in the halls. But with every moment of joy, the shadow of my past grew darker, whispering that this couldn't last. One crisp October evening, Lila convinced me to show her my old paintings, the ones I'd hidden in the back of my closet. I hesitated, my stomach twisting with nerves, but her encouragement was relentless. Come on, Evelyn, she said, tugging at my sleeve. I want to see the real you. Reluctantly, I pulled out the canvases, vivid landscapes and raw portraits I'd poured my heart into before life had dulled my edges. Lila studied each one, her eyes wide with awe. These are incredible, she said, tracing the brushstrokes of a painting of a stormy sky. You have to show these to someone. A gallery, a curator, someone. I shook my head, my throat tight. They're not good enough. And even if they were, I don't have the connections, the money. Stop, Lila interrupted, her voice firm. You're good enough. You're more than good enough. And I'm not letting you hide this anymore. Her belief in me was overwhelming, and for the first time I let myself imagine me work on a gallery wall, my name in lights. Lila spent the next week helping me research local galleries, even dragging me to an open call at a small venue in Chelsea. I submitted a portfolio, my hands shaking as I handed it over. Lila squeezed my shoulder, her smile brighter than the city skyline. You've got this, she said. A week later, I got the call the gallery wanted to feature my work in a group show. I was stunned, my heart racing as I told Lila the news. She whooped, pulling me into a hug that lifted me off the ground. I told you, she said, her eyes sparkling. This is just the beginning. But even as we celebrated, a new tension crept into our relationship. Lila's past, like mine, wasn't so easily left behind. One night, as we lay in bed, her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She ignored it, but I saw the way her jaw tightened, the way her fingers curled into the sheets. "Who was that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "No one," she said too quickly, her eyes avoiding mine. "Just a wrong number." I didn't believe her, but I didn't push. Not then. But the calls kept coming, always at odd hours, and Lila's mood grew darker with each one. I tried to focus on the gallery show, on the thrill of seeing my work hung alongside other artists, but the unease between us was impossible to ignore. The night of the gallery opening, I was a bundle of nerves, my hands sweating as I adjusted my dress in the mirror. Lila was there, looking effortlessly cool in a blazer and jeans, her arm around my waist as we mingled with the crowd. My paintings drew praise, and for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. But as the night wore on, I noticed Lila slipping away, her phone buzzing in her pocket. I found her outside, pacing in the alley behind the gallery, her voice low and tense as she spoke into the phone. "I told you I'm done," she said, her words sharp. "Leave me alone." When she hung up, she saw me standing there and her face fell. "Evelyn, Who was that?" I asked, my voice trembling. "And don't tell me it's no one." Lila sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's my brother," she said finally. "He's been trying to reach me. My family. They've been looking for me since I left Ohio. They think they can fix me, bring me back to their version of normal." I stepped closer, my heart aching for her. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to see that part of me," she said, her voice breaking. "The part that's still running from them, still afraid of what they think. I wanted to be strong for you." "You don't have to be strong all the time," I said, reaching for her hand. "Not with me." She looked at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't deserve you, Evelyn." "Don't say that," I said, pulling her close. "We're in this together, remember?" But even as I held her, I felt the weight of her past pressing against us, threatening to pull us apart. I didn't know how to fight it, but I knew I wasn't ready to let her go. The gallery show marked a turning point, but not the kind I'd hoped for. Lila's past was no longer a shadow, it was a storm, gathering strength with every call from her family. I wanted to be her anchor, but I was barely keeping myself afloat, caught between the thrill of my art career taking off and the fear that we were slipping away from each other. One snowy December night, Lila showed up at my apartment, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. "They're here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My family. They found me." My heart sank. "What do they want?" "To talk," she said, her voice bitter. "To save my soul, probably. They've been calling for weeks, but now they're in New York. They want to meet tomorrow." I pulled her inside, wrapping her in a blanket as she shivered, not from the cold, but from something deeper. "You don't have to see them," I said. "You owe them nothing." But Lila shook her head. "I can't keep running. I need to face them, Evelyn. For me." I nodded, swallowing my fear. "Then I'm coming with you." The next day, we met her family at a quiet cafe in Brooklyn. Her parents and brother sat stiffly at a corner table, their faces etched with disapproval. Lila's mother, a stern woman with graying hair, barely looked at me, her eyes fixed on Lila like she was a puzzle to be solved. Her father was silent, his hands folded tightly on the table. Her brother, the one who'd been calling, spoke first. "Lila, we just want you to come home," he said, his voice pleading but laced with condescension. "This lifestyle isn't you. We can help you." Lila's jaw clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "This is me," she said. "I'm not broken. I'm not lost. I'm happy here, happier than I ever was with you." Her mother's eyes narrowed. "You're living in sin. You're throwing away everything we raised you to be." I felt Lila tense beside me, and I squeezed her hand under the table, my own anger rising. "She's not throwing anything away," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "She's building a life, a good one. And she doesn't need your permission to do it." The table fell silent, the air thick with tension. Lila's brother glared at me, but her mother's gaze softened, just for a moment before hardening again. "You don't understand," she said. "She's our daughter. And she's my home," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Lila turned to me, her eyes wide with surprise and something else. Love, I realized. Love that mirrored my own. The meeting ended with no resolution, Lila's family leaving with tight-lipped promises to pray for her. But as we walked back to our building, Lila's hand in mine, I felt a weight lift. We'd faced her past together, and we were still standing. That night, Lila stayed over, and we talked until dawn about her family, my fears, the future we wanted to build. I don't know what's next, she admitted, her head resting on my chest. But I know I want it with you. Then we'll figure it out, I said, my fingers tracing circles on her back. Together. The next few months were a delicate dance of healing and hope. My art career blossomed with more galleries reaching out, and Lila started taking classes to become a sommelier, her passion for her work reigniting. We faced challenges, her family's occasional calls, my lingering doubts, but we faced them as a team, our love growing stronger with every hurdle. One spring evening, as cherry blossoms bloomed in the park where we'd had our first picnic, Lila pulled me onto the same blanket and handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was a sketchbook, its cover embossed with my initials. For your next chapter, she said, her voice soft. And for ours. I opened it to find a note in her messy handwriting. Evelyn, you're my home too. Let's keep building it. Tears stung my eyes as I pulled her into a kiss, the city fading around us. Our story wasn't perfect, but it was ours, two women who'd found each other by chance, who'd fought for love against the weight of their pasts. And as we sat there, wrapped in each other in the promise of tomorrow, I knew we'd keep fighting, keep loving, keep building a life that was messy, beautiful, and undeniably ours.